Hello, 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 everybody. Thank you guys for joining us. Today, we're going to have a conversation about home buying. And yes, we're talking about home buying in this crazy market. So, if you are new to home buying, if you haven't bought a home before, if you're thinking about selling your home, buying a new home, whatever the reason is for you buying a home, this is a conversation that you want to tune into. So, I am joined here by Tiffany, and I'm going to introduce how we met in a little bit, but she is a realtor in Michigan and Ohio, right? I got that right.
Yes,
And so
absolutely. Correct.
she's going to be giving us information on how you can purchase a home, buy your first home, next home, whatever it is, how to navigate things that you need to know that you may have not known or haven't had access to a realtor to even ask these questions to. So Tiffany and I, we were both in the personal finance space, and I would say that we both are still kind of in the personal finance space. And I remember, I don't know if you remember this, Tiffany, but at FinCon, when you came up to me, you thought I was somebody else. And you
I
were so
forgot
confident. You were so confident in it. I was like, I'm not that person, but nice to meet you anyway. So that was my memory on how we connected, obviously being connected on social media. And I've been keeping up with you and everything that you're doing in real estate. So why don't you tell us a little bit more about how you got into real estate and yeah, just how you got into real estate.
Great question. So, for me, hi everybody. I'm Tiffany. So, as far as real estate is concerned, I was leaving the public accounting field. I was extremely stressed, and I didn't really have I didn't have a plan. And at that point, I just knew I needed to get out of public accounting.
Wow.
So, I resigned from my position at a public accounting firm, and I was taking a break, trying to figure out life. And one of my friends was an agent, and she texted me and said, "Hey, I know you have a background in finance, accounting, and our broker, our office is looking for somebody to fill that position. And resumes are due at midnight." And it was a Wednesday. And that was back in 2017. And like 11:59, I submitted a resume, and I was just like, whatever, we'll see what happens. And I got a call back for an interview, and I started working at an independent brokerage, and it was basically history from there. So all the exposure, I started off on the operations side. So managing one office that they had at the time. And then that particular broker came to me and said, "Well, I think you can manage our acquisitions and our property management." And I'm like, I'm just trying to figure stuff out. And I just got here, and I'm so happy that I took on that challenge. And over the years of doing that, I no longer do that now. I learned the entire process, make connections with mortgage lenders, title companies, and got licensed in 2019 in the state of Michigan. And it's been history since then. So that was the intro, my
So I
introduction.
a part of it. So I knew you were in accounting. I didn't know, like, I guess I just didn't know the whole story. So I'm glad to hear it. But a part of the reason that I wanted you on is because you do have that financial background. So obviously, what we're talking about, yes, we're going to talk about buying a home, but this is going to heavily lean on the financial aspect and the financial readiness in order to do that. So let's hop right into that. So
Okay.
it's listen, I've been on Zillow. I've been on Zillow lately, and these house prices. So why don't we talk about what's the first step to buying a house in today's market? Because child, these prices are out here wild.
So I would definitely say, and of course, I'm a licensed realtor, so I may be a little biased,
Right.
but I think that it is so important to purchase a house and first have a conversation with a licensed realtor. Like that's going to be my recommendation. And the reason that I would say that is because with the right person, you are able to really kind of like create a roadmap, right? Of
Mm-hmm.
like how you want to proceed, exactly your situation. Everybody's situation isn't the same. And it really helps you to brainstorm on when it's the best time for you to start.
Mm-hmm.
So that would be my recommendation. And then if somebody says, "Well, I don't want to work with an agent, I want to do this solo," kudos to you. Then the next step is going to be determining how you're going to pay for the house. Are you going to pay cash, or are you going to go and work to get pre-approved for a mortgage? So that would be just depending on the person. That would be the first step, getting an agent. The second step would be then meeting with a lender, connecting with a lender, so that you can determine what you can afford.
So I have to confess, when we bought this is our first home that I'm in now. We did not use an agent at all. So I think when we talked on the phone, I was like, yeah, I wanted to be. I thought about doing real estate, and that's because we never used an agent. So I had to learn all of this stuff. Well, I don't know what convinced us to do it that way. By the way, I'm just like, we were just young and like, let's figure this thing out on our own, and it worked out. Thankfully, it all worked out. But I learned so much along the way. But one thing I always said is I will never do that again. It was a great learning experience. But I'm like, at this point in my life, I'm just gonna hand this off to somebody else. Because it was a whole lot.
It is a lot. And this is the way I put it, because I work with buyers and sellers, and I work with a large, I would say a large percentage of my sellers are for sale by owners that I convert into deciding to list their home with me. And so you can do it, right? You can sell your home, you can buy a home, you can do it. But it's just like if you cut yourself and it's really, really deep, you could probably stitch it back together, right? Like, you may not know what to do, but you can do it. But you take so much risk. And for so many Americans, your largest asset for so many people is tied up into your home, the home you're either purchasing or the home that you're selling. And why take that type of risk? That is just that. But and then in addition to that, some people say, well, I'm buying a new construction home. I don't need an agent to buy a new construction home or to build my house. I don't need an agent to build a home. And you don't. But a lot of buyers in various states are different as far as the requirements of what I'll use the word agency, meaning representation from a buyer or a seller who's representing you. That's what like the agency part means, is that with even purchasing a new build, a lot of buyers don't realize when you get to the office, that person that works there in the office works for the builder. So in fact, everything that's happening in the way that the purchase agreement is written is always favorable. So it's always good to have somebody that is a professional in the field to kind of help navigate you and alleviate some of the stress.
10 out of 10 would not recommend. Okay. It was a great, I would not definitely recommend anyone to do that on their own. It was a great learning experience for sure. Learned a lot about legal documents. I learned a lot. I learned a lot about negotiation. I would say my negotiation skills probably were strengthened through that experience, and communication and all that stuff. It definitely has helped me later on in life, but don't y'all just find you an agent. And Tiffany is one of those people. All right. So you mentioned the first step is finding an agent if you're going to use one, and then kind of coming up with a plan, how much you can afford, and that type of, I guess, timeline even. So what are the things that they need to consider when buying a home or looking into purchasing a home?
So the first thing that I would say that you want to consider is, if you're not doing it by yourself, if you're going to have another decision maker involved with that process, then the two people or three or four, all the parties need to be on the same page. And sometimes that can be really difficult, much easier said than done, because you want to have some type of idea of what it is that you want so that you can effectively communicate that. However, a large portion of my buyers are first-time home buyers. So throughout the process, as a professional, you kind of peel back the layers to sometimes help buyers understand, what do I want, right? So I would say making sure that at least you have some type of baseline. And one of the questions, the big question is that if it's your first home, are you in a lease? Like, can you, if you're in a lease, what does that timeline look like? So you want to consider your timeline. Moving from one place to the next, I've had clients that have moved across seas from the West Coast to the Midwest, and, or never saw the house. I did everything. And then they just met me at the house and got the keys. That's like a lot of trust. So, really depending on the situation, you want to look at your timeline. And then you also want to consider, is that flexible? Like, do you really need to be in the house by this time frame? And then your needs versus your wants is a really big thing. So, for example, if somebody has pets, and depending on the breed of the dog, like they may need a fence. They may not be able to go into a private community that doesn't allow fences because aesthetically they want everybody's house to look the same, or a certain type of fence. Or in some instances, some people say, well, I don't want a neighbor. I want to be able to have a farm. I want to do this. I want to do that. So your needs versus your wants is another thing to consider. And then your budget. That's why getting pre-approved is so important, because and I'll tell people up front, anybody you give me a call, like, we're not going to go shopping for a home without a pre-approval, because you don't know the baseline. What are you starting with? And for first time home buyers, it can be very confusing and also very discouraging, because you're looking at a house that's 400 and you can only afford 3, and I always laugh at like HGTV and all the shows, because it's like, my budget is 1.2 million, and it's like, okay, so, all right. And then you want to consider the location. That's huge, because depending on where you live, so I work in 2 markets. Like Toledo, Ohio, I'm in Northwest Ohio, is one of the least expensive places in the United States to live. So it's a very attractive place for investors, for sure, coming from the East and the West Coast, because you can buy like 4 houses, and depending on the type of house, you may be able to buy 8, with $1 million, because
let me find out.
It's like one of those things where, depending on your needs versus your wants, and then what your budget is, it can really help put things in perspective as far as what you can afford, and some things you may have to kind of give or take on. So that would definitely be your timeline. Well, first having the conversation, communication, your timeline, and then looking at your needs versus your wants. And with that, that budget being in there, and then the location. Where are you shopping? Where do you want to live? Because that's going to drive whether you can have 1,000 square feet, 2,000, 3,000. So that would just be a few things there.
I think a lot of times, at least for us, when we were thinking about like our first home, you have this idea, and I guess this is my way of telling people, kind of level your expectations, especially if it's your first home. Like, I want all this stuff, and then it's like, 1, you don't need it all, right? And then 2, now having been in this home, I can be more concrete about, okay, we need this and we need this in the next home. So I think maybe watching too much HGTV, you think, oh, I need all this stuff, and it's like, maybe that's more of a want than a need right now. And then also, to that point, though, I remember you said that you don't take your clients in houses they can't necessarily afford. I remember, like, we would just go neighborhoods and wherever. And so the last thing I would hate for people to do is go into these houses and they fall in love with it, and then it's not even in your budget. Like, you can't even get approved for it. So I think that's some things that people should know as they are first time home buyers. Now, you talked about pre-approval. Let's talk about that really quickly. Maybe not really quickly. So there's pre-approval, and there's also pre-qualification. Could you talk about like what the difference is there, and what you mean when you say someone needs to be pre-approved?
Absolutely. So for one thing that I will say, a mortgage, because I will ask a lender this. Some lenders use pre-qualification and pre-approval interchangeably. Okay. So the first question as a buyer is, if I'm communicating with the lender, what do you mean? Define that for me, because some may say a pre-qualification is just a verbal to say, like, this is what my credit score is. Well, let me actually take a step back. There are a few things that most lenders are going to look at. And I will say all lenders are not created equal. And when you're considering purchasing a home, you really have to look at it like you're building a team. So if you want the main players on the team, you're going to have a real estate agent. You're going to have a mortgage lender if you're obtaining a loan. You will have an insurance agent. And then you'll also, depending on the state, you may have a title company or you may have a closing attorney. So in Michigan and Ohio, they work with title companies. And you don't have to use a title company to close. However, for the sake of this example, or, I will say that it will be in your best interest to do that. And we could kind of, I don't want to derail from the thought, but I'll just say those are the main players on the team. So when you think about the team as a whole, generally I have title partners that I work with quite often, mortgage lenders that I have relationships with. And just to kind of get an understanding, it's illegal to get what we call like kickback from these particular third parties.
Mm-hmm.
It's always nice when you work with people that you work well with, but some buyers will come with a pre-approval already or pre-qualification. But generally speaking, if they're working with a preferred lender that I know, then I kind of know how they operate. And when they are saying pre-qual or pre-approval, what that means. So generally a lender is going to look at your income. They're going to look at your assets. So how much you have saved, how much you may have invested. It could be if you are purchasing a second home, how much your first home is worth. They also will look at your debt to income ratio. So when we talk about money, we talk about paying down debt. You want to consider those things. That becomes important. Your credit score is a huge piece of that puzzle as well. No credit is pretty much just in the same boat as bad credit, because you can't do too much of anything with either when you get ready to purchase a home. And generally the lowest credit score is going to be around a 580. But I will say this, at about a 580, that would be considered low. You're going to have a lot of excessive fees that you could be charged. So it's like, depending on the lender, without going into too much detail, you will have basic requirements across the board, and different things that are pretty general. And depending on the state, they may have different programs that are available. A 640 is usually between Michigan, Ohio. That's a credit score that you can work with for down payment assistance programs. And then you will have, so you have your income, your assets, debt to income ratio, and employment is also another thing. So, and then the credit score. With employment, generally, most times it's pretty kind of safe to say around 2 years, but it varies from lender to lender. So when you look at all those pieces to the puzzle, the pre-approval will be determined on based upon all those things, those different pieces. And some may just verbally say, okay, what is your score? Do you have a job? How much have you saved? And that could be considered a pre-qualification. So verbally, that means absolutely nothing. So it means absolutely nothing, right? The proof is in the pudding, the proof is on the paper. So other lenders may say that's a pre-qual, and now I want a pre-approval. So with a pre-approval, they want to verify that. So provide me bank statements to show me that you have X amount of dollars saved in the bank. Mm-hmm. Usually they want 2 months worth of bank statements. Provide me 2 years worth of tax returns. Most recent. If we're in January, they're going to most likely ask for your W-2 or your 1099s. And then they're going to be they're going to run your credit. And a lot of people will say, well, okay, it's going to be more than one person on the loan. So usually they're looking at the lowest score out of the two. They don't average them. So if both of you have credit that's a little shaky, the great thing about connecting with the right professional is that I have some buyers that come to me very early on and say, this is my goal. I want to be in a home next year. So we will start very early. I will connect them with the lender. I don't necessarily believe in paying for credit repair, that kind of stuff. Mm-hmm. I know folks like, okay, there are just a few things that we can do to take responsibility for our personal finances. And if you become a good steward, paying your bills on time, coming up with an action plan to do that. And I know you talk about those type of things. So I won't go into a lot of detail there. In addition to that, a good lender will have programs available to help get you on the right path and direct you. And in addition to that, there are free companies, Operation Hope, free nonprofit organizations out here that will help buyers get their finances in order, but you have to do the work. So again, they're going to verify all that stuff. And then once they verify it, then they will provide a pre-approval letter, and I even take additional steps to ask, because every lender is not the same. With the pre-approval, did you just take a look at it? And they will usually, some people will run it through the desktop underwriter. So like they enter this information and it shoots out a pre-approval. I like to take it a next step and get an underwritten pre-approval. An underwritten pre-approval means that the underwriter, so when you get ready to get a mortgage, either you may have a broker that you're working with. Mortgage brokers can basically look and shop different lenders to connect you with the right one as a buyer that fits your particular financial background, and say, okay, you could work with this lender, they could help you. Or if you're working with a loan officer, for example, you're working with a loan officer with a big box bank, or with just like, you have mortgage companies such as like Rocket, companies like that. They work directly for that company. So they would be considered a loan officer. They submit the file to who is like, at the top of the food chain, the underwriter. They're reviewing everything. So they have to get comfortable with that. I would prefer for the buyer to have had that pre-approval and that information, all those documents reviewed by the underwriter, because that way it really kind of solidifies that pre-approval.
Gotcha.
So I will stop there, but basically interchangeably, depending on the lender. But you want to make sure you understand which one, and then ultimately have a verified pre-approval where it's been at least reviewed by the loan officer.
Gotcha. So I want to add some stuff to that point. So you talk about the pre-approval letter, and I'm just giving my experience. I remember we got ours and we had already made our budget. Obviously I'm personal finance, right? So we had already made our budget about what we could afford, but when they came back with a letter, it was well above what we wanted to pay. So I think we had our lender like, no, change this letter. Like, I understand what you're saying we are approved for, but we don't need to be going out seeing houses above what we know we can realistically afford. I don't care what what you said we can afford. We know what we're comfortable with. So I think that's important too. Is like, just because they say that you can afford $1 million house, like, you don't have to go, get one if you literally cannot realistically afford it with your day-to-day expenses within your budget. So that's one thing I would add to that. I don't know if you agree with me on that one, but that's one thing that we did do. I'm like, don't be telling these people we about to buy no $1 million house, because we not. We have
I agree. So having that personal finance background, one thing that I always will share, and it's mutual, like, you have to build a relationship. So being in the real estate industry, people say, oh, I know such and so, they sell real estate. There's so many people in this industry where we may not get a bad rap as bad as like car salesmen, but in real estate, there's so many people that are doing this. And I don't want to knock people that are doing it part-time, but like, you just have to make sure that you have an agent that you trust, that you're working with, that really you feel like they have your best interests in mind. Because I always tell my clients, so 2 things: what you can afford based on what makes you comfortable, and what the lender will tell you can be 2 different things. And if you don't feel comfortable with that, because you can purchase the house, right? You can pay the mortgage, but can you afford to maintain it? Similar to a car. You could buy a Benz, you can buy a BMW, you can buy an Audi, but can you afford the oil change? Can you afford to get a new tire?
Right.
Unexpectedly, when that, you hit a pothole in Michigan, that basically takes your car under. Can you afford to pay and replace those things? And so it's really important with the house. There's so many different moving pieces. And not only that, you have to consider that one huge difference from a house versus with renting is taxes, millages. Like there are votes that take place periodically. Hopefully you're voting. Hopefully you're exercising your right to help determine whether they're going to pay for, the science center in the area and pay for the bus line to run here. And then your taxes are going up. So those are really important things to consider because it is a huge piece. And then the utilities, right? You want all this grass. I remember when we were purchasing a home, my husband and I, and it was between two homes in our area. And I said, the other home had like the backyard just reminded me of an oasis. Like it was just beautiful plants, all these trees. And the first thing I thought about was the water bill. Why would I buy a house that has a rainforest in the backyard and then it's not raining in the summertime and I gotta constantly, and so these are the things that you really want to consider,
exactly.
In addition to that. So it's a huge piece, because that's not going to be included in that mortgage payment. You need to save and have an emergency fund for when your AC goes out and it's like 1,000 degrees outside and you live in Florida.
Right.
You know what I mean? Like you got to consider that.
That's the thing I wanted to get to. Like, you need to consider all of the costs. It's not just the mortgage. I was getting my nails done today. I was talking to my nail tech, and there's a house in our area literally has made global news on sale for $22 million. And the house is gorgeous. Like, it's beautiful, beautiful estate. Let's not even call it a house. It's an estate. This thing has horse stables. It comes with a kangaroo if you want the kangaroo. We were talking about it. And I'm like looking at it on Zillow because I just be looking at houses. And it was like the mortgage alone was like over $100,000, right? For the mortgage itself. Then the taxes per month were like $10,000 per month. And then at the bottom is like, does not include utilities. Ma'am, no, like, first of all, who I don't know who can get a $22 million mortgage, but kudos to you because whatever you do well. But also, I'm like, the expenses associated with just maintaining and like we don't even have to talk about a $22 million house, but when you're thinking about buying a home, like those are things that you have to consider. Do I have to maintenance the lawn? Is there an HOA fee associated with
yes.
it? Like the taxes, the utilities, the upkeep, like there's so much stuff to consider. So when we were looking at what they were pre-approving us for, we're like, no, like we will be what they call house poor. Like we will have a nice house, but we ain't gonna have nothing in it because we're just gonna be paying the mortgage and there's gonna be nothing left. So I think that's important to consider as well. The other thing that you mentioned was around the credit, right? So I am going to talk more about credit on this channel and on the site. But I haven't talked much about credit. A lot of my focus was on paying off debt. But one thing that we had to do when we bought our home, because we were debt free at the time. So to your point, it's like having no credit is just as bad as like having bad credit when it comes to getting a mortgage. And so thankfully we did have a good lender that we worked with, and he was like, we really clicked with him and he was really helpful. And he was like, here's what y'all can do. It's like, I know what y'all belief is around, debt and stuff. He was like, just go get a credit card, use it for a few months. Because like it hadn't been that long since we paid off, or I had paid off my loans. My husband, it had been a while since he had any debt. So he was like, just use the credit card, pay it off. He was like, once we close, you can, do whatever you're going to do with the credit card, cut it up or whatever. But having someone who was like having that real conversation with us and, really helping us, that's the importance of having really good people on your team to support you in that. So I think, to your point, having the right people on your team is going to be important for you to be able to execute your overall goal of being able to purchase your home. So
I agree with that 1,000%. Like, and I think that sometimes it can be hard to be vulnerable. Like, my husband and I are very, very different. He's extremely analytical, and his first thought, not really being aware of the process and how it works. A lot of times people come in and they think, well, I know somebody and I trust them and I want to work with them. And this is from the real estate professional standpoint. You want to work with them, but you think that they have to review your tax returns. They need your social security number. A real estate agent doesn't need any of that information. All they need is that sheet of paper that gives them that pre-approval or proof of funds if you're paying cash. And the lender is the one that actually is going to be reviewing those documents. And it's so important that you have those transparent conversations. And I would, in addition to that, one nice thing about starting early and really, really kind of like coming up with a game plan is that I tell people, if you know you want to buy a house, just open up a bank account and save money specifically for the house. Because when you get ready to purchase, if you have your money all in all these different places, like, so I was an auditor, right? And when I introduced myself as an auditor, people don't like auditors. They don't want to hear that they're just thinking about people coming in, looking at what they did. Well, you can kind of think about getting pre-approved and going through the process like that until you close. Like your lender said, I don't care what you do after you close, but until you close.
Right.
Until you close. And I mean, don't go 24 hours before, buying furniture,
Right.
getting unpre-approved, until you close. They're going to be looking at and reviewing what you do from that bank account that you give them. So you just made me kind of spark that, but you want to work with somebody you trust so that you can be open. And one thing to really know is that like they say, like, you don't want to plan a wedding and be like trying to buy a house at the same time. Like, those are bad ideas to do all of those. Like, I did all of those things, but you don't necessarily, if by chance, you don't want to mix it all together. But if you decide to take on that responsibility and that task, it's really important to plan to just help make things smoother, right? But just, you want to find somebody that you trust so that you can really get as much from the process, because the next time around, you're going to be completely different. It's just certain things, like people build homes, and we didn't build our home, but like some people I know, they built a house, but that first home that they built, after they built it, they were like, oh, I would change this and that. Because you go through the process and you learn things along the way. And now you're like, okay, I don't want this, I want that. And so I definitely think that it really, it's important to know, like, you're going to learn so much along the process. Allow yourself time to really just make sure, like, I think time is really important, like, as far as making sure that it's what you really want, but then don't miss out on the opportunity of something, because the market, it does shift and it goes through different cycles. On one thing I'll mention, since we're talking about even the mortgages, and people have probably heard this, but you marry the house and you date the rate. Don't get so caught up in the fact that interest rates could be at 6% or closer to 7% this week and this or that. And then you find a home that you really love, that you can afford, that is comfortable for you, where you can refinance later. Because depending on the demands, the demand for that home will drive the price up no matter what the interest rates are, and I think all those are just really important things to consider when you get ready to make that purchase.
And this is why I said I would never do it on my own again, because it's so many variables. And I would say, like, we were certainly blessed to get the home that we're in now. Like, it was all divine. I did a video on it years ago. Like, the house was on the market for the longest, and it literally just, it was our house. Like, that's the only way I can put it. It was just our house. But I could not imagine today, like, trying to go out there and buy a house. As a matter of fact, it was in maybe like last year, 21, maybe, we started getting letters from people, like, just trying to buy our home. We were like, no, we are not coming off this house. I'm sorry. Like, y'all gonna have to pay us double in order to buy a new house in this area at this point.
Yeah.
Not at all. Now, we talked about credit, and you mentioned some of the scores. Obviously, the higher your credit score, the better rate you'll be able to get, the more favorable things will be. But let's talk about how much actual cash you need to have, because there are things like the earnest money, inspections, and all that stuff. So what are other things that people need to look out from a financial standpoint when they're thinking about buying a home?
So from a financial standpoint, saving is just going to be key. Like saving as much money as possible, really being diligent on creating a game plan and timelines for that. And that's why I think that um, it's really good to open up that bank account as early as possible. Just start putting money aside. So various states have different requirements. And one thing that you want to keep in mind, in addition to whatever state you're living in and what those requirements are, is that there could be things that become a requirement that may not be a state requirement when whatever is written in that purchase agreement. So the big thing is that you really have to pay attention to what you're agreeing to do or not do. As a seller, what you're agreeing to do or not do or leave behind. So things you want to consider as far as from a buying standpoint, you mentioned one, earnest money. So in Michigan and Ohio, earnest money is not required. It's not something that is required. It's a good faith deposit. It is something that every buyer I've ever worked with have always put down an earnest money. There's no minimum. There's no maximum. One thing that I will say is that when you get ready to purchase the house, and these are the conversations from the perspective that I have with the other agent. If there is a listing agent or seller's agent on the other end of the deal that's representing the seller, then I'm having that conversation with that agent. If it's not, then I'm having the conversation directly with the for sale by owner. What is it that you're looking for? Because that's important. So you want to consider that your earnest money, depending on if you're in multiple offer situations, different approaches you can take in the negotiating process to make your offer more favorable. So another thing to think about is terms in general. So in the offer, it's not all based upon what you're offering as far as the purchase price, because your down payment is one thing. Earnest money is generally something that very early on in the process. So if you're getting a mortgage, usually depending on the lender, some are a little faster than others, but getting that verified, that underwritten pre-approval will make it move faster for you as a buyer. You're usually under contract from either 25 days, some as soon as 14, as quick as 14 days to like 45 days. And during that process, early on, the due diligence period, and that's like a state to state thing, but usually at the beginning in the offer, you as like the buyer can determine and say whether they want to have a private inspection or not. So private inspection is a fee that's generally not paid by the seller. That's something that the buyer pays for. Depending on the private inspector, their responsibility is to go into the house, inspect it. And I don't just pick any random private inspector. I didn't do that. I don't recommend that my buyers do that. I also have relationships with private inspectors, but they should be looking at the roof. If you're in the Midwest, basements are common in a lot of areas. They should be going in the basement, because basement is also a source where there could be water, all that kind of stuff coming in. You want to look at that foundation. If it's a crawl space, sometimes water gets in that crawl space. If it's on a cement slab, is that, foundation, is that structural? Is it secure, right? So those are things that inspectors are going to look at. Usually those charges and those fees vary from inspector to inspector, but usually around 500 or so. It could be up to 1,000 because they offer different services in addition to that. If you want to have a camera ran down the sewer line, if you have a sewer where, those type of things. So I always say, consider that. That usually happens within the first 7 to 10 days of going under contract. So outside of the closing costs that a lender will tell a buyer they need, that private inspection is something extra you want to have money for. Cash, or some may take a credit card. But again, you're not trying to get into debt. You're trying to really kind of save for things up front. Then that's just one thing to consider. The earnest money, some areas 1% may be common. In other areas, 1% of the purchase price. In other areas, it may just be, I've written offers for some properties of $500 earnest money. You are in certain areas, it could be a $50,000 earnest money.
Wow.
So and that's based around the type of client you're working with, what's involved with that. So earnest money, And then in addition to that, the appraisal is usually something, if you're not paying cash, then you have to have an appraisal. And the appraiser's job is to go in and value the home and say, how much is this house worth? And the lender uses that to determine how much they're going to loan you. If the appraisal comes back and you offered $350 for the house, $350,000, the appraiser says it's only worth $325. You have a $25,000 appraisal gap. Now, at the height of COVID, people were coming in, bringing that extra cash to the table to say, no worries, as a buyer, I'm going to pay that $25,000 appraisal gap. People were doing that. And that's why I really encourage buyers not to get caught up in what the interest rates are, as much as if they find a home that they can afford and that they like, what do you need to do to move forward? Because consider, if demand goes up, it's going to drive the price up. It's going to attract. At literally, this was last March, I had a house in the Detroit metro area. We had 40 offers on that house.
Oh my gosh.
40, you only are going to get one buyer, 40 offers. Only one offer can get accepted. So let's talk about like driving the price up, the term. So just consider that. Earnest money, the appraisal, usually, it could be 500, it could be more, but you want to talk. And that's why it's important to connect with the professional, because agent is going to help you based on that particular area in which you're shopping in, say, this is what is common here. So those are three things: the earnest money, the private inspection, and then the appraisal.
Okay. As far as a checklist, so we know that that's the money that you got to have saved. So open the bank account, start saving that for those inspections, the earnest money, and then the appraisal. So have money set aside for that, in addition to any down payments and all that stuff. So what other things, like, kind of go through the checklist of what the process would look like for someone who's buying a home for the first time?
So I'd say, like, the roadmap, the first thing, like I said, meeting with a real estate professional is going to really be important. I would recommend it. Number two, you're going to get pre-approved. And then once you're pre-approved, at that point, I do buyer's consultations with my buyers so that we can really kind of recap after the pre-approval to determine, okay, now that we have this pre-approval, kind of nail down exactly what you can afford, because sometimes what I'll do is set them up where they're receiving notifications of homes that are listed on what we call the MLS, the multiple listing service. This is where buyers can see homes that sellers are selling that are represented by another agent or that are cooperating with an agent. There's one thing I did not mention. Now, this is something that's really important, and there are a lot of moving pieces, and I'm not going to get into detail on that here, but know that it is a myth to believe as a buyer that the seller has to pay your real estate agent's commission. That is a myth. That is not a requirement that a seller has to pay your buyers, your agent as a buyer, their commission. So when you are working with an agent, that is something that is a part of the conversation, because that drives your closing costs as a buyer. Do you have to pay fees to that brokerage, that you're working with to help you secure that home? If a home is listed on the MLS, usually there's some type of cooperation. The cooperation could be $1, but these are really important conversations that you should be having up front with your real estate professional to make sure that you don't have any surprises. And that's something from a professional standpoint that you should be having with your buyers to make sure they're not surprised. So when you get ready to have that buyer's consult, some people will just go take people out. That's not the nice thing about being a real estate professional, is that I can run my business. I'm not a broker. So I have a brokerage that I work for, and I'm an independent contractor. So how I run my business, as long as I comply with their rules in the state of Michigan, the state of Ohio, that's up to me. So I'm always making sure that we look at all of that up front. And then after they've come up with everything that is important, we start looking at homes. I always recommend Zillow is huge. You don't have to live in the state to go to Google Street View. I'm sorry, not Zillow. I meant to say Google. Go to Google Street View to run that camera up and down the house, up and down the block, to see what the house looks like. So going to drive through the neighborhood, if you know that's important to you, if it's off of a main street and you have small children and you know that they may run into the street, as a real estate professional, I can't say to you where you should live. I can't say to you, go here, go there. That's for you to decide. So I always say, start driving around on Sundays later in the evening if it's a community you think you want to live in, so you can kind of see what's going on, because that's a huge part of it. So as you're viewing homes, once you get under contract, the earnest money, private inspections, appraisals, all that stuff, the ball starts to move pretty fast a lot of times. So you just want to be ready, and then know that you want to manage your expectations. Unreasonable expectations. And then keep in mind that, like, if you have just a little bit of creativity, it could save you tens of thousands of dollars. Most buyers want, or I shouldn't say most, a majority of buyers, a lot of buyers want, I'll just go ahead and say it, move-in ready houses.
Yep.
First-time home buyers. I want gray walls. I want white trim. I want tray ceilings. I want cathedral here.
Yep.
I want, a 5-car garage. You have 1 car, but you want a 5-car garage. Right. You want all of these things, right? But how about that house that just needs a paint job? How about you just get a quote from a painter and find out if you have time to move and make that transition? It could save you $10,000 versus being in multiple offers, $10,000 in Toledo when the average home is less than $200,000. That's a nice little bit of change, right? You could do other things with it. So that's something to consider at that point. What renovations are you willing to do? And then once you close, at that point, you really have to consider things that are going to come up that are going to need to be done. One thing I would say, location is so important, where you decide to live. And it goes back to the timeline. If you know you're in the military and you're going to be moving in 3 years, my recommendation for you would not be necessarily, depending on where the market was when you purchased your home, to put too much money in it if we already know time is like going to be ticking and you're going to need to resell.
Right.
You buy a yellow house and you really, really like it, but you're going to need to sell that yellow house in 2 years. Well, the likelihood of someone wanting to buy a yellow house is very unlikely. So I think those are things that people have to consider.
Yeah.
Resale, and so that may seem far away, but that would be pretty much, and I hope I answered the question with that, but those are, just kind of in order from start to finish, like you're meeting with that agent, you're getting pre-approved, you're going to look at houses and managing those expectations. And then you have some of those other things. And the appraisal is one thing that's in there as well. Once it's appraised and you have clear title or the closing attorney, all those documents are ready. And that's something that I didn't mention that's really important. And that's, that title partner or somebody making sure that, and this is something you want to consider in your planning from a financial standpoint, how you're going to take title in your state. Are you going to be on the title by yourself? If you have a spouse, are they going to be on title with you? If you have, if it's just you, but if something happens to you, what does that look like? And it's really good to have all that kind of in your mind, in your plan, in your estate planning.
Mm-hmm.
Is the house going to be in a trust? Is it not going to be in a trust? Like, all those things are really important, because 9 times out of 10, your home is going to drive a huge portion of your net worth.
Right. I'm so glad you mentioned that whole title thing, because I just had flashbacks to when we had to do the title, and the lady was like, do you want both names on it? And what if he's out of the country or you're out of the country? Are you going to, like, I was like, nobody prepared me for thinking about any of those things. But to your point, super, super important. So the very first thing that you said is find an agent, talk to an agent. So how can people find a trusted agent? I know obviously there are people who advertise on billboards and stuff, but how can people find a trusted agent? How can they work with you perhaps? What's the process for finding an agent that can help them?
That is a great question. So I have a network of agents that I know. I'm a I have a coach, a real estate coach, and I'm a part of the Mike Ferry organization. So with the Mike Ferry organization, like there are other agents across the country, Canada, that I've connected with over the years and have, invested a lot with to really kind of help take my real estate business to the next level. So if someone's not in Michigan, they're not in Ohio, and they need some assistance finding an agent, I will be more than happy to, they could reach out to me and, provide, and I can give them and connect them with an agent. So that is one way. In addition to that, they have, different platforms out there, Zillow, Realtor.com. One thing I will say about all of these different platforms, and just know this, and I think it's important that buyers understand this because sometimes they get confused. Usually if you find an agent and if you go on Zillow right now, you click that button to connect you with an agent, some agents pay fees to those particular brokerages so that their name can pop up at the top, right? So just understand that you want to do your homework. So there should sometimes, hopefully the agent has reviews out there or past clients. You can kind of just look at and see certain things. You can do your own homework. I mean, there's social media to really kind of help. So I think it's important to do that. And then of course, obviously relationships. So if you know someone that is an agent, then you could of course reach out to them. But I think that it's just important to have a transparent conversation as well about expectations, because you could know someone, but you want to make sure that that relationship is still going to be intact after after you get finished with the transaction. And I'll say this because I've been in this position. People that I know, love, and trust, they decided to go with another agent. They didn't want to work with me. And that's fine and dandy because that is your choice to make. But as a real estate agent, we also can make referrals to other agents. So I would say from that standpoint, some people say, I never knew that. Referrals meaning you get compensated. If they close the deal, you can charge that other agent a referral fee. Just being super transparent right now. That's a way that people also can build their business, is that at least let that other person know, because they may be able to introduce you to somebody that's really bomb, right? Because I tell people all the time, you don't want to work with me, because I have other agents that I'll refer business to in my communities that I live in, because I know I can't service that buyer to the highest level. And that's important, right? I do residential. I don't specialize in commercial property. That's a whole nother animal. So to make sure you're serviced properly, just have that conversation. If you do know an agent and you're kind of on the fence, if you don't think it's going to mess up your relationship with them.
Literally, this conversation with my husband was like, the next house is like, yeah, we can go with such and such. I'm like, it's not, because we still want to be friends. So, because I'm going to be demanding.
I mean, it's like, as an agent, I tell people all the time, you become somebody's best friend in a very short period of time. You know a lot about them. You spend a lot of time with them. You get to learn the personality differences between, the partners, the spouses, and, about the kids, the dogs, everything is going on. And it's a lot of moving pieces, And so it's very interesting, to say the least. You meet a lot of cool people and build a lot of relationships. And that's honestly what it's about. It's important, especially in this line of business. I think it's important to build those relationships.
For sure.
So
tell the people how they can connect with you, even if they're in Michigan or Ohio, or they say, hey, I'm in another state, but can you refer me to someone that's trusted? How can they connect with you?
Absolutely. So you can find me on, my number, I'll start with my number. So my number is 734-265-0408. So that's the way to reach out to me via phone, 734-265-0408. So I'll put that out there. Another way you can reach out to me is via social media. So I don't have the same handles. So I'll just lead with that. But on Facebook, so my name is Tiffany and my last name is Jones. Both are very common, but it's TJ Sells Real Estate and the number 2. So T as in Tom, J as in John, Sells, SELLS, Real Estate 2. So that's how you can find me on Facebook. And on Instagram, that's the other platform. It's at, and then I am Tiffnick. So IAMTIFFNICC. So, yeah. And yeah, you'll find a lot because I started off my journey with like the debt free, and I was really involved in that movement. So I kept the page there. So if you go through my Instagram, you'll kind of see my journey going through that process. And, now transition to basically real estate for the most part. So those are the ways that people can reach out to me. I love to connect. One thing I'll definitely say, because I love to provide value, is that if people just have general questions around certain things, definitely don't hesitate to reach out to me. And I love to connect you with someone, if I can't answer it, that can, because it's important to make informed decisions.
Right. Especially with a purchase like a home.
Yes, a purchase like a home. You do not want to regret it. You want to make sure you're following the right process. And even if you don't decide to use an agent, there's just certain things that I would definitely say to consider. If you're using an attorney in, Michigan or Ohio to close the deal, or it's just a title company directly and you're going to handle the paperwork, I always still like to say, just consider these things so that you cover yourself and the liability that, that's out there.
Listen, by the grace of God, we were covered from not making any crazy mistakes. In fact, we found mistakes. And when I tell you, I could have had a law degree at the end of that. We found some mistakes in our contract. And I was like, wait, we're not about to sign this. All this needs to be corrected. So anyway, would not recommend doing that again, but just FYI.
Yeah, it's a lot. Like, people don't realize, like, it's a lot of law involved in that. And with an agent, you get certain attorneys and things like that I have access to really kind of help. Very seldomly do I have some of those questions, but in Michigan and Ohio, I rely a lot on our title partners for things with deeds, and you have all that kind of stuff out there. So it's important to just really kind of lean into the process and be open-minded and go with your gut. If something doesn't feel right, like, listen to that, because sometimes I feel in my spirit, this isn't right, but some people just say my gut, whatever it is. So thank you so much, Paul. This has been amazing. So
thank you for providing all this valuable information. And so again, y'all, please be sure to connect with Tiffany. She is I am Tiffnick on Instagram, and then TJ Sells Real Estate 2 on Facebook. And then the number, I think I got it right, 734-265-0408. And again, even if you aren't in Michigan or Ohio, she can connect you to a trusted agent that can assist you on your journey. So thank you so much, Tiffany. I appreciate it, guys. If you have any questions, be sure to drop them in the comments. I'll be checking them, and we'll be sure to answer them. And until next time, we'll talk later. Bye, guys.
Bye.